All right, and we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome
Hello.
to Pitch Feedback Live. Welcome, Stephen. My name is Maddie Mindling, and I am part of the community team here at Tongal. Joining me today is Director of Production and longtime producer, Stephen Iwanyk. Thanks for joining us, as always.
It is a wonderful pleasure every single time. I love this. This is the most fun thing that I do.
That's great.
Genuinely.
Genuinely, especially right now. Stephen, how long have you been at Tongal for?
Getting close to 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's fair to say that you have been reviewing and evaluating pitches for quite a while at Tongal, and you're more than happy to share that knowledge with us today.
I am indeed. I've seen tens of thousands of pitches, or if you were about to bust out a number, don't bust out a number. It's going to make me feel old.
I promise I won't bust out a number.
But yeah, a tremendous amount. And the thing that I always tell people when I first start working with them too is like, I used to manage TV writers and directors. So like the thing that I especially love about what we do or what Tongal does or what I do, however you want to describe it, is like, I love crafting pitches, helping people craft pitches and just trying to work on the sell and develop talent. So like I've been doing this for a long time at Tongal and have a lot of that insight, but it's something that I've always loved to do.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things is to see that there's just really no one right way. There's no, there's no perfect pitch out there. Like there are so many different ways to approach it. And, one of the things we'll be talking about today is just kind of looking through the brief and thinking through, what's the best way to approach this specific brief. So yeah, I'm sure you've seen many different takes on how to pitch. And so we'll be bringing some of those ideas to you guys today as well. Mainly, we'll be taking a look at 3 different pitches from filmmakers in our community who've graciously volunteered their work for the purpose of this live stream. And we'll be giving pitch feedback in real time. So this is really meant to be a collective learning experience for everyone. We know it is not easy to have your work dissected and peer reviewed in front of others. So we really appreciate those who have lent their past pitches to us. But these are really great pitches. They're really awesome, which makes it, I think, which makes our jobs just as difficult because we really have to find some of the more nuanced feedback that goes beyond, our basic pitch tips 101. So again, we really appreciate the filmmakers who have offered their work for this collective learning experience. And for those who may not be familiar with Tongal, we're an open creative platform that brings the world's creative work to the world's creative talent. You can work on exciting projects for some of the world's biggest brands, no matter where you live, as long as you have the skills and the know-how. So today we're going to be taking a look at, as I mentioned, those subtler adjustments that you can make to really take your pitch to that next level. And if you want to learn the basics for creating a pitch, you can head over to our pitch tips page on our website, which is on our Tongal 101 under the community tab. But today we really want to dig deeper into, again, those more nuanced things that producers and our clients are looking for and give you a window into that process to help you become a better pitcher and to really just give you a window into Stephen's mind, essentially. I like to say that this is more of an honors class as opposed to a 101 class. So if you have any questions for us throughout, please feel free to ask them in the forums. We'll be checking those periodically. Just say hi. If you just want to say hi or introduce yourself, we appreciate that as well. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you're interested in having your pitch reviewed on our next episode of Pitch Feedback Live, feel free to drop us a line at info@Tongal and let us know which of your pitches you'd like us to consider. But before we dive in, I thought it might be nice to get to know our guest, Stephen, a little bit more before he puts his producer hat on and what he's been doing to keep Tongal connected during COVID-19. All of us at Tongal know that you're a pretty avid cyclist. And before the shutdown, you used to ride your bike into work pretty often. And now you're practicing safe social distancing and making surprise visits to your coworkers all around LA. Which is not an easy task. So I would say you've probably covered like half the company so far. Is that accurate?
I think I'm on 22.
Wow.
So 2/3.
Oh, that's amazing. And I wanted to show some pictures from these rides that you've been taking. And again, like our company's pretty sprawled out across LA. I live in the Valley. I know some people live in Long Beach, so these are not easy rides. So here's you visiting Dan, our content strategist, Nick Funk, our post-production manager, asset manager, Catherine, one of our producers, Mike, who's on our dev team. This has also led to some pretty fun Photoshop opportunities from our teams. This is you visiting Caleb. I appreciate this. And then Scott, one of our also VP of production, holding a frozen Dodger beer. That is a wonderful Photoshop job by Mercer from the community team. So what has been the hardest ride for you so far?
So definitely the hardest ride was Mike, who lives up in Chatsworth.
Okay.
So he's like in the hills that go into Simi Valley on the other side of the valley. So I had to go over the Hollywood Hills, all the way through the valley, all the way up to Chatsworth. And then when I finally got there, I had to go up hills again.
Oh, wow.
And,
so you don't even get that enjoyment of getting over the or getting over the hills into the valley, taking that, that nice downhill ride right into the valley, and you have to go back up.
Yeah, no, you go downhill, and then I'm like on flat for like, I don't know, 15 miles. I think it was like 65 miles total.
Oh, wow.
It was a lot of elevation. I lost a tube. I lost a tire. That was definitely the hardest. Harder than Long Beach, which was 75 miles. And the next big one is Chino Hills, which will probably be 100 miles.
Wow.
Where are you in Tarzan tomorrow?
Yeah, that's true. So you've been building up to the harder tracks. When you originally set out to do this, did you think that you would try to visit everyone, or was it just to visit a few people kind of closer to where you are, and then it sort of expanded from there?
So I live in like Mar Vista, which is near like the Santa Monica airport, and my like normal kind of like workout training ride is like 25 miles. I leave from my house, I go down to the Manhattan Beach Pier, turn around, and come back. So like it's fast, it's fun, but like I was down in Manhattan Beach, desperate for human contact, and realized I was a couple blocks from one of our other producer Tommy Reed's houses. So I was like, Tommy, what are you doing right now? He's a parent. I knew he'd be up. And I went over and we kind of like had coffee, hung out, and like he loved it, right? And like appreciated being able to see another human, because
it had been like a few weeks at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, when you're in the office, especially, like, we see each other more than we see anyone else. So all of a sudden, when we're all kind of like on lockdown, it's like these are the people you like spend most of your life with, and they're gone. And so it was so nice, and it was everyone dug the email he sent out and photoshopped the hell out of that picture. So I was like, I should keep doing this. And I think it was maybe like 4 or 5 a.m. when I was like, okay, I have to do everyone as long as they're within a day's riding distance.
That's really setting the bar pretty high. Well, you've also been involved with crafting our production guidelines, our safety guidelines for COVID-19. We're really anxious to get live action filmmakers, especially, back to work. Let me go ahead and add this to the stream so you guys can take a look. We just published it to our blog a week ago. And really it's just about, how to work safely in a live action environment. We're really keeping on top of, areas that are experiencing high volume of cases, and, keeping up to date on all of the federal, state, local guidelines. And that's something that you guys should be doing as well. But we wanted to put this together as we kind of work through how to get our live action filmmakers, back to work at this time. So highly encourage you guys to read through that when you get a chance. And I'm sure our moderator can put a link in our forums for you guys as well. All right.
I'd add too, because I know this has come up before in talking to some of the filmmakers, that like there's a concern that I've heard that brands may not be aware of how difficult it can be to execute certain things, or that because Tongal is a global platform, like how can I compete in Los Angeles with someone in, such and such location who might not have lockdown, right? But like brands are keenly aware of the restrictions in place right now, and they're not going to ask you to go do things that are unsafe. Safety is paramount to them. Safety is paramount to us. And they recognize that there are going to be limitations to what they can do. And we try to make sure that we're accounting for that when we're writing briefs. So we see a lot of things that ultimately just end up as like I'm a director, my wife is a DP, and we're going to shoot our kids for you.
Right.
But like, as long as you're taking this into account, remember that like everyone else is taking this into account too. And if you're dealing with limitations because there's a spike in your area, or there are restrictions in your area or your country, whatever it might be, everyone else is dealing with something too. So it doesn't really put you at a disadvantage.
Right. And I think we've also seen through people's pitches that they've been able to really think through how they would approach the ask from the client, in a way that is safe and in a more contained environment. So we've seen our community really take the initiative to to make those adjustments themselves. And so we've been really impressed by that. And you'll actually see some of these pitches. These pitches are pretty recent, and the 3 pitches that we're taking a look at today. So some of them didn't include kind of, how they would take that approach. And I think that'll be interesting to see as well. Before we get into each pitch, I just want to kind of quickly talk about the show format. If you guys aren't familiar, we'll be taking a look at the brief first to get a sense of, its main ask, objective, because as we know, you guys, in order to have a great pitch, you do have to really understand the brief, go through it even a couple of times. And so we'll be kind of, taking our own advice here and looking through the brief, looking at the executional mandatories from the client, and then going back to the pitch and kind of talking about, what adjustments we would make and what they did, right in that instance. So as we go through each pitch, we'll be asking ourselves basically like 3 essential questions that will help get you into the mindset of our producers and our clients. The first is, does the filmmaker's links to past work speak to the task at hand? So typically when a producer looks at a brief or looks at a pitch, they are going into your links to past work, usually one of the first things they do. The second question we ask is, does the pitch address the requirements laid out in the brief? And that could be either the client's goals that they laid out and the executional mandatories. And is it feasible from a production standpoint? That's usually our last question. So with these questions, our goal really is to help, again, put you into that mindset of our producers and clients when they evaluate pitches. And hopefully you can start to ask yourselves these same questions the next time you work on a pitch. So, of course, our clients and producers are looking for different things. They're approaching the briefs from different points of view, but we do want to kind of help you put you into that mindset. So the next time you work on a pitch, you feel like you're answering those questions that might come up. And then, I think that kind of gets us right into our first pitch here. I will pull up. Let me go ahead and add this to its stream. All right, so our first pitch is by Kevin Christensen, who's joining us today. Thank you for tuning in, really appreciate it. And Mark, see you there as well. All right, so this is for Tiffanys project. Go ahead and let's take a look at the brief first and look at the objectives. So I believe this is live action. The main objectives here of this project is to produce a suite of videos, the social videos, to increase awareness of the new jewelry line from Tiffanys, the T1 jewelry collection, and inspire Tiffany customers to go into a Tiffany store and check out, various stylings of this. And so let's see.
So the key element of this, for 10 grand, it's a narrower target than you think it is because it's Tiffanys. So it's like sophisticated high-end jewelry. But as you scroll through the brief, there's this one really key line in here that I think is makes it so much more difficult to attack this if you miss it. That is that it's important that these assets feel authentic coming from a sales professional and shouldn't replicate what the Tiffany brand put on its own social channels and brand campaigns. Meaning, this is sort of like a high-end influencer video, right? So if it has a lot of production value and a lot of polish, like you might think for a Tiffanys thing, then it's not going to have that authenticity, and it's not going to feel like, this is just what I did in the store. You should take a look at this ring. It's so beautiful. Or this bracelet. It's so beautiful. You know, they kind of want it to be like the sales professional almost did this themselves.
Yes, it has to feel like something that like it has to feel approachable, I think, if it's going to be in their social feed.
Yeah. So it's a more difficult ask than you immediately realize. The first time I ran through this, I missed it. So it you know, in giving it a careful read, I was like, great. So this is a narrow target, and you have to think really creatively about how you can do this just right. And you can always push the boundaries if you can justify the way you're pushing the boundaries. But it does mean that it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and look at the Filmmakers links to past work first, and kind of see how that ties into the execution, and then we'll go into their pitch. So this is the top example that they put into their links to past work.
So we'll talk about this in a second, but what's super cool about this is like the camera movement, the focal depth, and just like, you know, how much you're picking up on this. And I don't know if we necessarily need to look at other past work. He covers his bases pretty well there, but
yeah.
In the pitch, he talks about the Donatello camera, which I know very well, and I know your DP Richard for working on the Todd McFarlane documentary that's going to come out on Sci-Fi at the end of this month, because I've watched that documentary like 6 or 7 times in the last week alone. We're deep on post and almost delivered on that. But the Donatello camera is a robot-controlled arm with a camera and like a 360-degree rig where you can like put something on a turntable or on a table in the middle and move this whole camera. It's ridiculously cool. And opens with that right away, which is insanely cool.
Do you feel like this is too polished for something that should live on one of their sales associates' social channels or social feeds?
That was my first concern in looking at this, is like, wow, this is ridiculously cool. I'd love to see this happen. Holy shit, it's in their past work. This is great. It's such an amazing resource to have. And for the right kind of product and the right kind of spot, it's awesome. But for what the creative ask was, I'm a little nervous that it's hard to make that feel authentic.
Yeah. I would almost, because you are trying to walk that fine line between something that, you know, feels, you know, Tiffanys, but also feels like it could live on just, you know, your friend, like someone's just like who works at Tiffanys is sharing a really cool video about a new product they like. So I would show how you would incorporate this camera movement or this piece of equipment, but still have that sort of unpolished, like native feel to Instagram. And talk a little more about that, because I do think that is a very important cue from the brief, that the goal is to help the sales associates basically leverage their own social channels as influencers to share this new jewelry line.
Yeah, and Marissa, if you're controlling the sort of page there, if you scroll up to the first page of the treatment, and I'll say too, this treatment is great. There's a lot to like on this treatment. The first page of this treatment sort of walks us through like what the creative approach here is. And outside of Donatello, again, in thinking about what the brand's looking for out of this, I was a little concerned, right? Because the spot is awesome and polished, but is it too difficult to execute in 15 seconds? And does it, again, sort of like run astray of what the creative ask is, right? So we follow our main woman, we follow our main woman's hand as she performs everyday power moves, drinking her coffee, exercising, typing proposals, shaking hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm thinking about this, like as a 15-second video or as a 6-second cut down, I'm thinking, I could probably cut through this pretty rapidly, but even if I trim this down a bit and maybe spend a second and a half on it, I got a second and a half on coffee, a second and a half on exercising. Maybe I need a third thing to really illustrate it. So I've, spent maybe, 5-6 seconds introducing the spot and setting up 3 different kind of unrelated shots before we get to the real jewelry beauty shots. It's cool if it's a brand play. It's still difficult, I think, to cover all of those bases in the short amount of time that you have. But since, again, we're just trying to like really find a creative way to showcase the jewelry and very little else, I think that it's not quite what they're looking for.
I actually really like this shot here with the split screen. I think I wasn't clear as to whether or not that was. I think this is just a screenshot from a previous ad, but I really like the split screen look. It's a good way to kind of introduce different components at once, maybe different, like kind of get those 3 locations and stories happening at once, and then go into like closer shots. Because my concern was just like losing track of the product. Like it would be really hard to see the ring in detail while someone's shaking hands, holding coffee. Like I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be focusing on, or what this is about at first, unless I really get those like close-up shots. And it kind of does feel more like an ad and something that, one of my friends probably wouldn't like post to their social channels. But I do really like this split screen like effect. So I wasn't sure if that was something that was going to be incorporated. And I do think that kind of talks to like when you're like actually putting in like stock images or sample images to really like make sure the client's clear as to whether or not you plan to use that or what elements you plan to use from the image.
Yeah. And again, like in a vacuum, so much about this pitch is so well done and so well executed. So it's really just about that core creative ask and the challenges that you're faced with and what Tiff is looking for in this video. If you keep scrolling down, there's one other thing that kind of stood out to me in the mood board. So the mood board kind of feels like very typical generic jewelry stock imagery, right? Or jewelry ads rather. And like, obviously it's a mood that you're trying to establish and not necessarily exactly what you want to show, because you kind of have a little bit of that. But one caveat or sort of like guideline that I'd suggest for something like a mood board is that oftentimes I've found that clients, especially if they're not making content for a living, right? Like if I'm pitching something to the Sci-Fi Channel, it's different than if I'm pitching something to Tiffanys. If they're not always making content, they tend to be a little bit more literal. And because they're literal, if you throw a mood board out there and there's a whole bunch of things that kind of give you the emotional feel or the color tonality of what you might execute, it can still be a little confusing. Because I had some people look at this pitch and initially completely forgot that the pitch was going to be focused on people's hands, because they saw these shots and they're thinking like, oh, are we actually going to show our woman walking around? Especially when you get to the talent options here. We have some really lovely talent options. But again, since we're really just kind of looking at hands, I don't know why I necessarily need to see someone's headshot. So these were maybe a little bit confusing. And I think that it would be just as effective or more effective for you to have included mood images that were really focused on what you might show. right? So close up on the handshake, close up on someone holding the coffee. You maybe have to Photoshop it so that it feels a little bit more like what you're trying to accomplish. Because obviously there's stock images out there that are probably gonna look a little boring and not quite what you're pitching. But some of these things I don't think don't quite do what you expect them to do.
Yeah, I especially think I think that's a really good point about, clients who aren't really well versed in kind of constant content creation and looking at mood boards. It can be a little overwhelming at first, especially I think between the second picture and the third picture here. Like these are two very different like color schemes and personalities to me. Like the second one is like kind of more social, and I think probably more in line with what they're looking for in terms of something that feels organic to someone's social feed. This one here is to the right, feels much more serious and kind of like what we're talking about, the power move sort of look, and it has a much different color palette. And then of course we have like a black and white photo in here as well. So I imagine like the client is thinking, okay, like, are we going to use black and white? Are we going to go with kind of this more magic hour color tone here? So yeah, I think just thinking about who the client is and whether, and thinking about how explicit you need to be about some of these choices that you make in the pitch.
Yeah, and like none of these things are make or break too, right? It's not like anyone's going to get down on the mood board and they're going to be like, oh, I don't really know what the mood is here, so it's a pass for me. But it's an opportunity to do more for your pitch.
Right. Third question here for this is it feasible just from a production standpoint?
I mean, I guess, that sort of comes back to, are there too many things that we're trying to show in a 15? Part of my job when discussing these things with the client too is to say like, look, in their pitch, they listed out, 5 or 6 different things. It's an easy note for us to give to focus on 3. Even so, since the core element of the pitch is we're going to show a hand in a bunch of different settings, does that in and of itself feel executable, or is it going to take away from what we're trying to accomplish? I just kind of wonder, like, for the budget, can we find one single location that's going to work really effectively for the medium or the close-up shot or whatever you might do to sort of clearly illustrate that this person is in a whole bunch of different locations? Maybe, but I think it's a question mark, and not a question mark that you necessarily need someone to get held up on.
Yeah.
Certainly for the 6 seconds, I'm not entirely sure what this is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe like breaking it up beat by beat, each of those, because I think it is really important to, especially again for clients who don't make a ton of content. It's like kind of breaking up the concept over multiple slides makes them do like a lot of mental math and kind of thinking about how is this eventually going to look. So I do find it helpful to kind of just do like a quick treatment or script of each of those breakdowns, just to help them visualize like what's going to be on screen. Is there going to, if there's going to be audio, what's going to be said, just so they can kind of, really picture like what this is going to look like instead of having to do some guesswork there.
Yeah. The one last thing I'll say too is like the Donatello being super awesome and probably what you're using for the jewelry shots. It was also maybe a little confusing, or I could see a client getting confused here, to talk about the Donatello shot, the Donatello camera, and try to imagine how you were going to shoot all of these real world scenes of someone, grabbing coffee and shaking hands. Because I imagine you're probably not going to use the Donatello for that. So how are you going to shoot those, and how is that then going to switch over to the Donatello arm?
Yeah, that's why I was thinking with the screenshot here, maybe having like some close-ups in the split screen where you are doing those kind of more fluid movements. So yeah, I think thinking through like how would you actually be filming those shots, which already like have a lot of movement in them. So you probably want to keep your camera pretty steady. So the product is, recognizable, it's up front and center, and people can kind of quickly understand like, oh, this is all about this like piece of jewelry. and not coffee or business meetings. So yeah. I really like that they also included a jewelry stylist in their pitch. I think that's really smart. It's not something that was asked for in the brief, but I think it does show that they've probably worked on a few of these types of shoots before. And just from her bio and everything, it looks like she's done a wide range of things that feel a little more approachable to things that are a little more like high fashion. So I would kind of speak to just to add context to the slide, I would kind of speak to how she would plan to kind of style these pieces of jewelry on screen and what her approach would be, and maybe get like a little blurb on that. But otherwise, I think that was really smart to include a jewelry stylist in the pitch.
Yeah, look, on the whole, this was a really cool pitch. You did a great job on like every front, and I think it really just kind of came down to distilling what the key challenge was in the brief and trying to figure out, does this pitch really address that?
Yeah. All right. Awesome. And I do love that they incorporated like that classic Tiffanys blue throughout you don't need to do that. You don't need to make your pitches look super fancy, but they did do a nice job kind of including that branding into the pitch. Yeah,
it's funny on the branding thing. You may not realize this until you deal with brand managers, but like so many brand managers and account folk, they spend like 60% of their life, I'm just making up numbers here, creating decks.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the decks are heavily branded. And so when they see a deck come in that is well executed and feels really well branded, it's just sort of like music to their ears. It's such a silly thing. But like, honestly, the amount of time and attention that goes into creating some of the PowerPoint decks that we see that come through is immense. And so seeing subtle things like this, it's not quantifiable what it does for you, but it really does help.
Yeah, and we do on Tongal have a number of templates. I'm sure our moderator can include that link, but we also recognize that some of our deadlines are pretty fast, and so we don't want you to have to spend all your time focusing on the look and feel of the pitch. So we also highly encourage you to just go into our production templates on Tongal 101 and download the treatment that we have there, and you can adapt it pretty much any way you want. It's pretty streamlined. It's black and white, and it's got some branding on it. But again, we want you to spend most of your time on thinking through the concept and the logistics and everything that's going to go into the actual creative, and less time on just the art of creating a beautiful pitch, as we know that is important, but we also understand our deadlines can be pretty demanding. So we did try to make that a little easier for you guys as well. All right, so moving into our next pitch. So this is from Elliot Ruddy. Let me see if I can add it to the stream here. So this is for Nutella. It's a live action project. Let me go ahead and look at the brief real fast. So synopsis: create a 15-second digital video that drives awareness to snackable Nutella and go, based on one of 4 fun taglines. And it seems like kind of the big thing here is showing people enjoying Nutella and go anywhere at any time. And that seems to be like a key messaging component to this brief, which of course is really challenging during COVID-19 because you're limited on locations, you're limited on a lot of things. So just trying to think creatively through that aspect. This is another, short piece of content, only 15 seconds in length. So I guess, Stephen, from your experience, what are some of the challenges when creating content under 15 seconds?
Well, the challenge for something like this is a little bit different than the Tiffanys one, because the Tiffanys one, it has to be sort of the way it's being used is a little bit different, which is why we always include sort of like exposure. Mm-hmm. In the Tiffanys one, it's like a salesperson sending a video to someone or sharing a video or pointing them to a video. And so like people are going to watch this video because they're directed to it. So it's less that you have to capture their attention. Whereas with a 15-second spot like this, especially for social, you want to capture their attention immediately. And because this is a 16:9 and a 1-to-1, you really need to kind of lean into the platform best practices, because they're inherently very different in key ways, right? Like a YouTube video you're watching with sound, and still a 1-to-1 video, if you're scrolling through it on Instagram or Facebook, you're probably not going to see a lot of sound. And so you can structure the videos differently. How you open the video can be very different. Rather than like really hone in on like each of the individual best practices, this is where I think it makes a lot of sense to look at the best practice page, because these are things that we developed in talking with Facebook, in talking with Google and YouTube. So these are some of their own best practices that they have a tremendous amount of data on for, as to why they work. They're obviously always still kind of guidelines, because you can kind of, a great spot can transcend any one particular best practice. But I think the key thing here is we want to get into Nutella as quickly as possible. We want to be establishing that brand, in the first couple seconds, no question. We want to make sure that it works without sound. So it's got to be very visual, which I think almost every pitch I saw on this, but this one especially did so well. I think that about covers it.
Okay. Two lines that stood out to me in this brief, specifically under the executional mandatories, which is something you guys should always read and almost use it as like a checklist when you're done with your pitch. Go through the executional mandatories one more time and just check these things off. Make sure you covered them. The first one is, regardless of which tagline you choose, you must consider how Nutella & Go can make any moment a wow moment. So that leaves a lot of room for creativity there, but you need to make sure that you're touching on that specific prompt from the brand. Like, what does a wow moment mean? How are you going to visualize that in a 15-second video? And then the other piece, bullet point here that I think is important is that be sure to show the versatility and convenience of Nutella & Go. It can be enjoyed anywhere. Again, a bit challenging because I think this was a pitch that was done in May, so we're kind of in the thick of COVID-19. So thinking through, okay, how can I create that sense of anywhere, anytime, with limited production locations, things like that. And I think the filmmaker does do a good job with that as well, using having the option of using like photorealistic CGI, which we'll get into. But yeah, I think do you want to look into Elliot's links to past work real fast?
Sure.
Cool. So here's the first one that he put into his pitch here.
Cool, simple, effective. Nice visuals.
Nice visuals. Here's the second one. It's pretty similar.
The wall's not going to hold back Storm Dennis in the north.
Yes.
Storm Dennis is coming.
Yeah, to kind of give me a Game of Thrones vibe there. And then he did have one live action that was, is this it? Oh, maybe I didn't put the live action one in, but it was actually like buried in his links to past work. It was probably, I think, the last link, and everything else was animation. But this is meant to be a live action video, so I would have probably put live action up top. However, it's interesting because live action is not mentioned at all in the brief. Like there's no like it must be live action. So I always think if you're unclear, it's always good to just go to the project forum and ask the producer and be like, hey, are they open to animation here? It's a great use of the project forum. Producers are always happy to answer questions there. And I think it is underutilized in our community as a resource. So as you're pitching and thinking through things, you're welcome to ask questions that, you're a little unclear about from the brief. And we usually get back to you within the same day. Okay.
Now, like, the caveat, maybe the challenge that Elliot was dealing with here, and I got to say his pitch is awesome. But like, for a live action video, certainly you want your most relevant work at the top. And the two pieces we looked at, it's got other good stuff in there too. They're really well composed. They're simple. They're effective. The copies, well done. There's nothing wrong with those as examples whatsoever. But because this is live action, I'd still want to lean with that. And this is like a common theme for me, if you're presenting past work to someone and you're not quite sure that they'll understand why, you can provide context, right? Like, I was the director DP on this, and also I think it shows X.
Yes, like, you can write up to, I think, 1,000 characters in the links to past work section of the submission. Like, and if you, again, I think this goes back to clients who sometimes need you to like really explicitly say, like, how are you going to use this? Is this the actual color scheme you're going to use? Like, it is absolutely okay to kind of do that. A plus B equals C. I am including this piece of work because it shows my ability to do this type of camera work, or because it shows my ability to do something in comedy, or just kind of explaining that. And we love kind of seeing how people can add context to their links in that way, because it is a little bit of guesswork when there's nothing but links there. It's like, okay, we're trying to do that ourselves and think through, like, oh, why, try to put ourselves in your shoes, like, why did they include this as their first link? So it's always good to if you feel like it might not be clear, it's not in the exact same vertical, like maybe you are pitching on a food and beverage spot and you don't have any food and beverage work in your portfolio, and you're just including something to show, like, hey, I can do like really cool like close-ups, tabletop work, say that. It's always helpful. It doesn't hurt in any way. We do have one question from Denver. Oh, sorry, Steve, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was gonna say, I'll get to Denver's too, because I think it'll be part of it. The next thing we were gonna talk about here was gonna be first impressions. I actually want to talk about the past work as a first impression thing, because typically what I do and what I think a number of clients do, I mean, I think they kind of, trust us at a certain point when we're, when we've really sort of honed in on like a short list at a certain point, but is you go straight to the past work, because someone may have an amazing creative idea, but if I don't feel like they can execute it, then it's not necessarily worth my time to really dig in on the creative if they can't execute. And so because the first thing I'm looking at is past work, and that first video at the top is the first thing I'm going to see, that's almost the first impression more than the opening page of your treatment. And so in thinking about it that way, even if it's not the most relevant, if you can contextualize it, but put a great video at the top, then kind of knowing the way human behavior works and behavioral economics works, like you're going to see that and you're like, oh, this is cool. And I'm gonna lean in here. What else we got, right? And so that top link is so important. And again, Elliot's pitch is awesome, and those top links, though very simple, are very good. But because it's a little bit off, it does kind of leave me thinking like, I don't know, what can we do here? And then I have to keep going, and I'll get there eventually, right? Because I'm going to look at everything realistically. But like when it comes down to the client, I think it's really important to sort of think about that.
Yeah. And so I think there's something there in the sense of, everyone has like that one piece of work in their portfolio that they're just incredibly proud of. It was maybe the hardest project they ever had to do. You don't necessarily have to put that first. You do have to think about like what is relevant to this project, but it doesn't hurt to include that, in like your second or third link, just to show us what you're capable of. Do we want to get into Denver's question real fast? Go ahead and add it to this.
Yeah. So Denver asked, do you recommend including a pitch video or not? Elliot, no question, we're going to come back to you in a second. But pitch video, I feel like, is really important. And the qualification I always make is that anytime you put together a pitch, there's like a cost-benefit analysis that you have to do, whether you do it purposefully or whether you just kind of do it subconsciously. is it worth my time to put this amount of extra effort into the pitch? A pitch video is really helpful because it gives you, there are multiple different ways you can go about executing it. But in many cases, it's a more engaging way to demonstrate what you want to do or talk about what you want to do, right? Like in the end, we're in the video business, right? And so putting together a good pitch video kind of says like, I can put together a good video. Here it is. Take a look. It's going to tell you what I'm going to do. If that pitch video is you just kind of introducing yourself, it humanizes you, right? You don't necessarily have to edit something together and have on-screen text and a whole bunch of other things, but like humanizing you to the brand or humanizing yourself to the brand is really impactful because all of a sudden you become someone that they can connect with. You're someone that they're going to put their trust in, right? That they're going to give a decent amount of their money to, right? And I think that's really impactful. And I've seen situations where brands are between like pitch A and pitch B, but they got to meet pitch B. He's such a nice guy, right? And that's the thing that makes the difference. Again, it's impossible to quantify how much of a difference it makes, but other things you can do with the pitch video, you can do a rip reel, right? Take a whole bunch of shots, like the shots that you're going to want to, execute, pull it from this movie trailer, this commercial and whatnot, and edit together your spot, right? You could just do a sample version of your spot. Here's a little animatic. I put it together in 3 hours, but it shows you what I'm going to do. All of a sudden, they're looking through their pitch. They get to your pitch video, like, oh, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
There have been so many times when someone does a great pitch video where I'm pretty sure the brand doesn't even look at the rest of the pitch. They're just like, this is what he's going to do for us. Let's do it. I saw it. It's great.
Yeah,
it worked.
It is an opportunity to do some like proof of concept too, if you have the time, for sure.
And what you could do to think about being very efficient about it is like you could record a video intro that is the same for every pitch video. And then you could tack on to the back of that what you might do for this particular project. And then, maybe a couple other things of your past work if you wanted, right? But like if you create a template, then it's easy enough for you to tack a pitch video on to every pitch.
Yes.
And it definitely makes a difference. And it never hurts. Never hurts.
Never. Yeah, I would say it never hurts. It's a good opportunity to kind of be in the room with the client, allow them a chance to kind of get to know you, get to know who they'd be working with. And I like your recommendation of, trying to streamline it, make a template of, this is who I am. This is, my creative background, and using that and then adding some more context to the project at hand. Awesome. Great question, Denver. Appreciate that. Go ahead and dive right into Natello. This is making me very hungry. I love because we will get into the hyper realistic renders and CGI. I like that he incorporated that into the brief. I also like that he started with his About Me page. Most people leave that to the end. I think it's really great to kind of just say, this is who I am.
It's a pass for me. I skip over those.
He's lying.
What? No. Like I'll come back to them later on, but my thinking is partially tied to efficiency. They've got a lot of pitches to look at, and the upside and downside to the structure that Tongal uses, where like we have a pitch phase for 7 days, and then everyone looks at all these pitches at the same time. Is like it's very efficient in many ways, but it also means that in so many cases, a brand is looking at all of these pitches in a row on one day. And so efficiency is an actual consideration that can make a difference. If I have to get through 5 or 6 pages to get to the idea, I'm going to get a little bored.
So you want to start with the concept.
I want to jump in as soon as I can.
That makes sense.
That said,
right here in the second.
Yeah. That said, and I'll always offer this caveat, like it's not make or break.
Right.
I'm not going to see Elliot's page and be like, oh God, another bio. But I want to move more effectively.
Yeah. So let's go into this concept a little bit. So as he describes, we open with a close-up shot of the surface of an office desk. In the background, we hear the typical hum of phones. ringing and coworkers talking amongst each other. The video begins to cut quickly to the track, to music track, keeping the product directly in the center of the frame the entire video as the world changes around it with each cut. So we see hands kind of passing this cup of Nutella back and forth. We see a breadstick or pretzel being dipped into the hazelnut spread before moving off screen, presumably towards somebody's mouth, and the music cuts out once again, and we hear the crunch of the breadstick as it is bitten into. So I think that does kind of cover that anywhere, anyhow, depending on what the backgrounds are, because it does seem like it is in a single office location.
No, that's just the opening shot. I thought this was a pretty brilliant way of trying to solve for this problem. Mm-hmm. The reservations I had come a bit later when we think about how we actually execute this.
Yeah, he does actually include, and I would reorganize this pitch a little bit because he does include like these great examples from other companies who have done these types of advertisements, where the product is kept front and center and the world kind of changes around them. There's this cool skateboarding one. So I would almost put that after this slide just because I do think that illustrates what you're describing really well. It took me a while to get it, and I had to like make that connection when I went back up to reread the big idea.
Yeah, my problem here is like, in my position, I feel like I've done this enough where it's pretty easy for me to imagine what someone's saying. Mm-hmm. I still wasn't totally sure, but I had a good idea of what he was pitching. It was just the actual execution. Right. And so those videos that he includes, later on down the line are literally where like, this is a razor that's in my room, so bear with me for a second. But like, this is your Coke bottle. It's going to be right here the whole time, and everything's going to change around it. You have someone holding it, and they're skateboarding, and they're jumping, and they're drinking, but like it's always right here. That's super cool. Difficult to execute, depending on how you do it, but super cool. And so if you're trying to figure out how you can show that Nutella can go, right? Mm-hmm. That's potentially an amazing solve because the product is front and center, 15 seconds.
You're changing
huge
up
win
with special effects. You don't even have to really film probably in different locations, especially with the way he proposes that. So after this concept, we get right into this breakdown of here's what I'm going to deliver. Here are some like freebies of like gifts and things like that, which is nice. It's a nice gift for the client. I'm not sure I would put that right after the big concept because I do think because we do kind of spend a lot of time here on like what the freebies are. Here's the additional sticker and gift library I'll provide for you.
Yeah, it's almost like a buy one get one free, and I'm like, wait, what am I buying though?
Right, and then we have this great slide on execution. So I would definitely move the execution up, like just put all of those things that are related to how you're going to make this happen into one area, because it kind of like I get distracted and then I come back to the execution. I'm like, oh yeah, like, and then I have to think through like I had to like go back and like read the concept and then go back to the execution. So just organizational note there. So he has two options here. The first is live action. The second is VFX and CGI that's photorealistic. So basically being able to recreate like people's hands, the background in complete CGI. And then he breaks down like, I like how he says, this is my preferred method, the CGI version. And clearly he has a good VFX background with the links that he showed us. Benefits of using VFX and CGI over live action. So I think you're really trying to get the client to pick the CGI version, which is fine. But just showing like, okay, flexibility in art direction, you could do multiple language exports, technical advantage. You can really, control like what the shots are going to look like. And then COVID-19 safety. So yeah, I do think, and then you show some examples here of some CGI renderings that you've done of different products. So these are all CGI. They look very realistic. And I think you also are including the Nutella bottles here that are CGI, I believe. Again, if they aren't, or if they are, this is a really good rendering of one. Yeah.
So come back to my like sort of reservations here in terms of execution. So the interesting thing about Nutella Go is that like it's not just Nutella I can wake up in the morning and go put it on my toast. Mm-hmm. Nutella and Go, there's the and Go part that's so clutch, and part of that is showing it in different areas. Part of that is showing how you can pop it open and hear the pretzel sticks. Mm-hmm. So I kind of need to see it being used to understand that, which is a little bit harder if everything is CGI. And then in terms of the CGI VFX element, the number one concern I have when it comes to someone trying to do photorealistic anything with CGI is that if we can't do it perfectly, brands can get really nervous and it can get really complicated, and you can run into major problems because if, this is a reflection on the brand. And if people see this and they're like, oh man, Nutella couldn't afford great CGI, it's a problem. It's a real problem. And oftentimes I sort of tell people, like, if you can't do perfectly realistic, do hyper stylized so that it looks like a creative choice. And I say that here because when we have this CGI Nutella in center frame, I'm imagining that people are grabbing it or holding it, or that there's some kind of human interaction around this. And so I'm thinking, all right, so I need a 3D CGI hand to come in and look like a real hand and grasp my Nutella or grab my pretzel stick. And I'm like, I don't know. Can we execute this in the timeline? Is the budget going to be effective for this? What kind of risks am I taking if I go down this route? Because it's a make or break. If it looks like a fake hand, people are going to know it's a fake hand. Even if audiences don't care tremendously, the brands always care more than the audiences do. And I don't want to be in that situation where I'm in like trying to get the picture lock and I'm like, no, it can't be made any more realistic. We're out of budget. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was my concern too. I was like, I don't know enough about CGI, but I was concerned. I would like to have seen samples of like real human, like photorealistic human CGI if he had that in his portfolio somewhere, just to kind of quiet down my concern about the hands looking realistic. Because I had the same thought there too, because all these are products here, and so I would have loved to have seen like a human hand or something, or even if he did like a quick sample of it, just to give us a sense. But I do think your solve is really interesting of just going with a more stylized version of what he's going for, a little more artistic, to kind of so there's not so many expectations around, is this going to look real or not?
Yeah, there's also, I think, sometimes this instinct that people have. They have a technology or an ability that's really cool and they want to use it, but it may not necessarily be the best solve. And so like if I'm reimagining this spot, the creative approach that he's taken is really cool, but I could do this with stock footage. I have a single shot, whether it's CGI or real shot, of my Nutella and Go center frame. And then I have all sorts of different stock footage. I could even put it on different types of tables with CGI if I wanted to.
You can film real
but the action is the background. Is like, well, we're at a skate park, we're at a birthday party, we're at the office, we're in the car, whatever it is. That means I don't have to shoot things. I don't really have to worry about people interacting with it. And then I plan for, in the last 5 seconds, a real hand coming in and dipping it to really illustrate the Nutella and Go part. Or maybe I open with that and I close with that. Whatever it is, I'm explicit about how I show the dipping part. And I'm clear about how I'm executing it, but I'm not overcomplicating it by trying to do everything in CGI.
Yeah, again, I think it's a really great concept that he came up with, but the execution does seem, for going back into our question of, is this feasible from a production standpoint? Yes, it does. It does probably ask more questions than it has answers. So yeah, but overall, like a really lovely pitch. Love how he put this together. I've seen other pitches from Elliot, and he uses kind of the same template. I think it's cool that he's done his own like little branded template here. Yeah,
man, Elliot, your pitch is super cool.
It's super cool. Yeah,
super cool.
Yeah. Again, like all these pitches are really awesome. It's just kind of trying to find those little nuances and kind of getting a window into producer and clients' mindsets when they go through these. So our next guy, I know we're going a little over time. Steven, you're good on time, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
10 minutes? Okay. Cool. So the next picture we're going to take a look at is by Mark Pinheiro, A Day in the Life, and it is for the Prediabetes Awareness Broadcast Video Project. So this has kind of an interesting ask. It's asking you to produce two broadcast spots, one, and they both have to be versioned in English and Spanish, to raise awareness about prediabetes. This brief kind of provides you with the very specific messaging for each of these videos. So the first video, it says, should inspire people to take the online risk test. And the second video should encourage people in North Carolina to enroll in a free CDC type 2 diabetes prevention program. So again, very specific calls to actions for these videos. And they have to be done in English and Spanish. So that's also something to consider. And then a couple of, I think, just notes here from the brand. We want to make this issue personally relevant, as many people are aware of prediabetes. Want to get the information across in an engaging way, in a tone and style, that feels appropriate for the current moment without putting people to sleep. And then also, do not depict food and diet imagery. The Ad Council wants to avoid stereotypes around diabetes about the health of people with the condition. So yeah, there are also some other executional mandatories here, but I think those are kind of like the big things that stood out to me as, okay, these I must make sure I'm checking this off my list. So let's go ahead and take a look at Mark's past work. So he provided, this first one is a reel of VFX.
All right, we're good there.
Yeah.
Then we have a show reel. Then we get
and then we have, this is actually a Tongal project. So his animation partner here, Callie, worked on one of our Lego projects. What I thought was interesting is that they did have a diabetes spot in Spanish in their portfolio, but it was kind of buried. I had to like really search for it, or in their links to past work. And I almost would have started with this because it is just so like on the nose relevant to the project. So yeah, quite an array. And I let's talk first about obviously like including a show reel in your links to past work.
I hate it. There's this line that we have with past work where it says in all caps, do not include links to your show reel. I'm obviously not going to like disqualify someone because they include a show reel, but like part of it is that it's just so hard to take away anything from a show reel. Mm-hmm. One of the inherent challenges in looking at someone's past work is that like every spot has different creative confines. The budget was big on this one. The budget was small on this one. This one was for social. This was for a brand that didn't know what it was doing, and they, noted my spot to death. So like that's always the challenge that we face in looking at past work. But when I'm looking at a show reel, there's just no context. It's a whole bunch of, everyone's got flashy shots that they can edit into a reel, but like it's so hard for me to take something away from a show reel. And I think key for looking at a lot of director show reels is like, I'm not sure, does the reel tell a story here? Does it show that I can, direct talent? Does it, accomplish messaging or social best practices? Was this single cool shot from a good spot? Is it from a cool DP that you work with? Is that DP going to be on this project? I don't know. There are so many questions that it asks that it's really not useful to me. Mm-hmm. So I think that you can still include a show reel. If you're going to include it, it's the last link in your past work. But I really don't think it's super helpful even then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also hard to determine like, can this person like tell a story? I think it's so nice to be able to look at individual pieces of work because you really get the full essence of that creator, and it's so much harder to extrapolate that from a reel, which obviously shows you have an amazing like VFX career, but it may not help the producer or the client really get a sense of who you are as a storyteller. And I think that's kind of the key here even with shorter content like this. So the first page of the pitch, we open up with the choices we make, which kind of talks about how the little choices we make every single day can impact our health. So it's almost like an opening statement I think it's like kind of the through line of these two videos. But it doesn't seem like the concept. At first, I thought this was the concept for the video, so it confused me just a little bit because I was like, oh, this is the concept. Like, they're going to take us through, kind of a day in the life of someone. And then we go into what seems like kind of the synopsis of the video. And you talk here about maybe doing like a really cool monologue that rhymes, that's kind of poetic and maybe even spoken word. I actually really dig that concept. I think that's really cool. But my first thought was, can we do this in Spanish? So just addressing that for the client of, can we both have the same messaging that rhymes in Spanish and in English? What about you, Stephen? Did you have any takeaways from the slide?
I, again, sort of talk about first impressions. If you scroll back up to the first page of this, I had concerns immediately. Now, the first page, like the actual title page.
Oh, the title page. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Here we are with a donut and broccoli on something that has, in bold all caps, do not depict food and diet imagery.
Yes, I did notice that too. It seems like the brand really wants to focus on like other things that aren't just diet related, which is interesting because I do think this concept here, this introduction does touch on that, like the daily habits. So that goes kind of beyond like what I'm eating. It can go like into like, am I exercising? Am I taking walks? Am I, sleeping enough, like things like that go beyond kind of those stereotypical food imagery. So I thought that almost did a disservice to the actual like concept that you're going towards.
Now, the next thing that sort of showed up, and this was something that was really key in taking a careful look at the brief too, is that they included 2 sample scripts. These sample scripts weren't mandatories, so you could work with them, but the messaging is not something that you necessarily want to depart from dramatically.
Right.
And so when I'm looking at the sample script, it's type 2 diabetes. We all know how the serious impact it can have, but how can it be prevented? Well, the first step is blah, 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 blah. But
Right.
it's like really heavy on messaging, not really heavy on setup. And when I look at this pitch, I see a lot of setup.
Yeah, they do provide this kind of messaging for each of these videos in the brief. So I think just that's a big cue from the client. If they are giving you a script, make sure you're reading through it and making sure that your messaging is aligned with this, even if you are taking a more creative approach to it.
Yeah, and my thinking would be like anytime a client is suggesting that you can use this, but you don't have to. I think the way I usually read that is you can do whatever you want, but you need a good reason to depart from this. And I didn't necessarily see a really compelling reason to depart from this. Especially as we, sort of get into like each decision is accompanied by infographics that highlight our lifestyle choices, food intake is food again, infographics displaying calorie and sugar intake, right? So like we're really running astray, and I don't know that it's necessarily justified.
Right. And the other thing that kind of stands out to me too is that these are 2 very distinct videos, right? We have the one that's encouraging people to take that online test, and the other one that's encouraging people in North Carolina to take part of this pre-diabetes screening program. And so I'm not sure which video this messaging is for, and there's really no distinction, right? At this point, like I'm, already page 6 in the brief, and I'm not getting like a clear breakdown. So one thing I always recommend, especially when you're dealing with like multiple videos for a client, especially for broadcast, is just doing like a quick AV script. I have a good example of that actually here from this website basically, but you can see that it breaks down like the video side and the audio side of what's happening. So I would have almost done like a short treatment for each of these videos using this format, because it really does give a clear sense of what messaging you're using for each of the videos and what's happening on screen. Because right now there's just no clear distinction between, is this for video 1 or for video 2? Because the execution is also broken down in a separate slide, in 2 separate slides here. So yeah, I would just kind of separate each video into one slide, show the script treatment, and then talk about execution, on the side of it, just so it's all in one place. Because again, it's kind of making me have to do those mental gymnastics of putting this all together.
Yeah. The innocent, invisible, injurious, if I spend a lot of time, I kind of understand what that is, but I don't know necessarily that it's connecting directly to what we're trying to accomplish. Because again, thinking about the objective of this video's got a direct call to action at the end. And so ultimately it really has to be a little bit heavier and get to a little bit sooner what that objective is, right? Taking the 1 minute risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. Everything has to ladder up to that really directly. This spot would be really effective, I think, like as a glucerna spot, perhaps. Some sort of product that that caters to diabetics or to people with prediabetes. But I think the real challenge that this has to lead to that call to action, and this feels so broad in many ways, and isn't necessarily leading me down the path that I want to go narratively.
Yeah, we definitely do want to see how are you getting to that final message, or how are you building up to that final message throughout, to encourage people to take that test or to join that program. So again, I think that kind of goes back into just really splitting this up, making sure these slides are clearly for video 1, these slides are clearly for video 2, and including that call to action. I do think this works as a general awareness spot. And it's interesting because we call this an awareness project, but I think it's way more like call to action and direct, I guess, almost a direct response in a way.
Yeah.
So I think that's more messaging on our end and in the brief, because this does work in terms of raising awareness about prediabetes, but I do think they have such specific things that they want the viewer to do after seeing this. So how are we getting them there is key. And I do really like the idea of splitting it up into these themes, but because these themes aren't explicit on screen, I wouldn't give too much focus onto them. And then we kind of go into infographics, motion graphics. So I think this looks nice. It is aligned with the colors from the samples that the organization provided. Again, we kind of want to stay away from that food and diet theme around for these videos based on that client note. And then execution on audio. So this is.
So I love both of these. This whole section of the pitch is awesome, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes people talk about how important it is to have on-screen graphics. And certainly, you're not the person doing the on-screen graphics in most cases when you're putting together this pitch. But even including a single frame or two of how you might potentially execute the graphics, it's super helpful, because graphics and text especially, there's so many different things that you can do that it's hard to really describe, other than to say, like, it's going to be really dynamic and colorful. And so getting a frame or two that illustrate it like we do here in this pitch is fantastic. And again, if you're not the graphic designer, go find something that looks exactly like what you're going to do and throw it on there, or really close to what you're going to do. And you can always say, I'm going to be really flexible about how we execute this, but I like this particular thing, and this is why. To give people context, and everything for me kind of comes back to like context at the end. But
yeah, and helping,
I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, and helping the client visualize the final product. I think what's also really interesting about this project is that it can be live action, animation, or stock footage, which is not always an option that stock footage is not always an option that clients explicitly say, like, you can make this completely out of stock footage. I actually, in this brief, didn't get a sense of what medium you were going to go towards, except for that there is a lot of stock imagery in the brief, in the pitch. So I assumed like, oh, okay, you're going the stock footage route. That makes sense. But just to kind of like clearly lay that out and maybe even create a board of some of the stock images you plan to incorporate so people can really visualize it, because it's such an easy way for them to do that. And I think what was really smart that this filmmaker did was they included a pitch video. I actually didn't cue it up, unfortunately, but he created a cut of some stock images and how these graphics would look, which I think is really cool because we know that you're probably going to be using some of those same images. And it's a good way to kind of communicate that look and feel to the client. So that we end on just filmmaker bios. So this is a 2-person.
Phenomenal.
I love all the color and all the pictures. So great. But yeah, so overall, this is a really awesome pitch. I think it really touches on that awareness aspect. It seems like the client does have a lot of kind of requirements, and I think anytime you're dealing with pharmaceutical or medical, you're always going to have that. I know, Stephen, you are kind of an expert in those things, having managed most of our clients who are in that vertical. So just being
also have diabetes.
Yeah, have diabetes. So just being mindful of, when these types of clients bring in like, a lot of references and a lot of do's and don'ts, like just making sure to use that as your checklist as you're going through your brief. And that's it. That's all we've got today, guys. I really appreciate you.
Real quick, actually, Mark has a question. If it's okay to add a reference video that the film will resemble. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
love it. Love it. In fact, I often feel like it can be helpful to include a reference video in links to your past work, not because it's your past work, but if you include it at the bottom with a line or two of context about why it's there, since people tend to start with the past work, there's a good chance if your reference video is well chosen, they'll see that and they'll get excited as they go into your pitch. And then with that reference video, as sort of like the mental framework, as they read through your pitch, they'll have a better idea of exactly what you're kind of saying. It accomplishes in some ways the same thing that a good pitch video might. And so you could also just sort of include a pitch video and just like, pop on screen, be like, hey guys, it's me, Mark. I'm putting together this pitch. Really excited about it. Diabetes sucks. Here's a quick reference video you should check out, and then look at my pitch. You could do it that way too. But as I was just kind of saying before, like anytime you're throwing a reference video, make sure there's context in there so I know how I'm looking at it. If it's like the text in this video is exactly what I do. Okay, cool.
And I think having watched this live stream and kind of knowing how both our clients and our producers are actually like going through the pitch materials, it really allows you to kind of think like, how am I going to set them up for success in terms of like just immersing themselves in this concept, getting them ready to enjoy this pitch. And so knowing that, most people are going to look at those links to past work first, that gives you an opportunity to really set those expectations up front, kind of prime their brain to kind of go through the rest of your pitch. So hopefully that's helpful, just kind of knowing what that process is like. Really appreciate, again, you guys sticking with us for the whole hour and 15 minutes. I know we went over time here today. But again, as Stephen said, this is one of our favorite live streams to do. Really enjoy it and really appreciate everyone who, submitted work to this. I know it is not easy to get feedback, in front of your peers, but it is something that we can all learn from and hopefully, help you guys in your next pitch as you go through the briefs on Tongal and just to read a brief a little more fully. And if you guys have any more questions after this, feel free to reach out to us at info@Tongal. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. And I really look forward to working with you because pitches were great.